The restaurant had a waiting list that ran 6 weeks deep, but the side entrance off the alley smelled like any other kitchen in the world. Grease, steam, and the sweat of people who worked too hard for what they earned. Through that entrance, at 10 minutes past noon on a Sunday, walked a man who had not slept more than 4 hours. Garrett Hollis, 34 years old, carried his son on his left hip and a paper bag in his right hand. The bag held a tie he had borrowed from a neighbor because he did not own one. His navy button-down shirt had been ironed that morning on a towel spread across the kitchen counter because the ironing board had broken 2 months ago and replacing it had never made it to the top of the list. His khaki pants were clean, but creased in the wrong places. His black shoes had been polished with a damp cloth and a dab of petroleum jelly, a trick his mother had taught him before she passed. The boy on his hip was Noah Hollis, 5 years old. He had his father's dark eyes and his late mother's way of tilting his head when he was thinking about something. He wore a white polo shirt tucked into small gray trousers that Garrett had found at a thrift store the week before, still with the original tags because someone had returned them unworn. Around Noah's neck hung a thin silver chain with a small pendant shaped like a compass. The last gift his mother had clasped around him before the cancer took her 16 months ago. She had told him the compass would always point him toward home, and Noah had not taken it off since, not even in the bath. They were here because of a promise. 6 months earlier, Noah had asked his father what a restaurant was, not a diner, not a drive-thru, not the pizza counter where Garrett sometimes let him sit on the tall stool while they split a large pepperoni. A restaurant, the kind he had seen on a television show at his grandmother's house, where people sat at white tables and someone brought fruit on plates with silver covers. Garrett had told him that one day, when he had saved enough, they would go to a real one together. Noah had not asked again. He had simply waited, with the patience of a child who had already learned that his father's promises arrived slowly but always arrived. Garrett had saved for 5 months. He drove a service van for a commercial plumbing company, covering overnight emergency calls across the west side of Charlotte. The base pay kept the rent current. The overtime kept the lights on. The restaurant money had come from a side job. 3 weekends spent replacing corroded pipes beneath a laundromat whose owner paid in cash and shook his hand like he meant it. The restaurant was called Bellacourt. It occupied the 2nd floor of a renovated textile mill on the edge of the Arts District, a building whose exposed brick and iron beams had been carefully preserved to signal that the people eating inside appreciated history, as long as it had been properly sanitized. The dining room seated 90. The cheapest entree was $42. Garrett had looked at the menu online the night before and done the math twice, then once more with a pen because the numbers made his chest tight. He had made a reservation under his full name 3 weeks ago. The woman on the phone had been polite. She had not asked what he did for a living or what he planned to wear. At the host stand inside the front entrance, a young woman with auburn hair pulled into a low bun glanced up from her screen. Her name tag read, Sloan. She was 24 and had been working at Bellacourt for 11 months, long enough to know the invisible rules that no one put in the employee handbook. She saw Garrett's shirt, his shoes, the boy on his hip, and her eyes performed the calculation that service workers in expensive places learn to do in under 2 seconds. She smiled, checked the screen, and found his name. Table 14, near the window. She picked up 2 menus and led them through the dining room. The room was full of the particular Sunday quiet that settles over a fine restaurant at midday. Linen napkins folded into sharp triangles, wine glasses catching the light from iron chandeliers, low voices and the careful clink of silverware. At one table, a couple in matching cashmere debated whether to order a second bottle. At another, a woman with a gold bracelet on each wrist laughed softly into her phone. The air smelled like rosemary butter and money. A few heads turned as Garrett passed. The glances were brief and surgical. They noted the shirt, the shoes, the boy, and then they returned to their plates. One woman at a round table near the bar, pearl earrings, silver hair, leaned toward her companion and said something behind her water glass. Her companion looked, then looked away. Garrett saw all of it. He had been seen that way his entire life. He did not slow down, and he did not speed up. He set Noah in the chair by the window and tucked the napkin across his small lap the way he had seen it done in a movie once. And Noah looked up at him with an expression that made the 5 months of saving worth every hour. "Daddy," Noah said, touching the edge of the white tablecloth. "It's so clean." Garrett told him it was, and that he could touch it, and that everything on the table was for them. Their server arrived within 2 minutes. A young man named Cole, 26, with a neat beard and careful hands. He greeted them warmly, poured water for both, and explained the specials without once looking at Garrett's shoes. He brought a small cup of crayons and a sheet of heavy paper for Noah without being asked. Garrett noticed the gesture and filed it away in the part of his mind that kept track of people who were kind when they did not have to be. They ordered. Garrett chose the roasted chicken because it was the least expensive entree that came with a side, and he asked for the macaroni and cheese from the children's menu for Noah, which Cole assured him was made with 3 kinds of cheese and a breadcrumb crust that kids lost their minds over. Noah asked very seriously whether the macaroni would come on one of the plates with a silver cover. Cole told him he would see what he could do and winked. For the first time in what felt like a long time, Garrett allowed himself to lean back in his chair. He watched Noah draw a picture of a house with a large yellow sun above it. He watched the light through the window fall across the white cloth. He did not think about the van, or the pipes, or the rent. He simply sat in a clean room with his son and let the afternoon happen. Then the voice came from across the dining room and the afternoon changed. "Excuse me, but who seated them?" The speaker was Pamela Stratton, 51 years old. She sat at the long table near the private dining alcove with 3 other women, each of whom carried a handbag whose retail price exceeded Garrett's monthly take-home. Pamela's blonde hair was straightened to a shine. Her charcoal blazer was cut so precisely that it looked like it had been poured onto her shoulders. She was not a cruel woman in every context. She donated to a children's hospital each December, and she remembered her housekeeper's birthday. But she had spent 30 years in a world that measured people by the details. And she had come to believe that the measurement was accurate. She was speaking to the floor manager. The floor manager's name was Derek Winslow. He was 39, tall, thin, with the permanently neutral expression of a man who had been trained to absorb complaints the way a sponge absorbs water. He had been at Bellacourt for 4 years and understood, without anyone ever having to say it directly, that certain guests carried more weight than others. Pamela Stratton and her group spent between $800 and $1,200 every Sunday. They tipped well. They posted photos that tagged the restaurant. They had once brought in a food critic from The Observer who gave Bellacourt a glowing half-page review. Pamela told Derek in a voice pitched just low enough to sound private, but just loud enough to travel, that the man at table 14 was making her guests uncomfortable. She did not say he was doing anything wrong. She said the word atmosphere. She said the word standards. She said that Bellacourt had built a reputation on a certain experience, and that the experience was being compromised. Derek glanced at table 14. He saw a man cutting a piece of chicken into small bites for a child who was drawing the sun. He saw nothing that required intervention. But he also saw Pamela Stratton's face. And on that face was the expression she wore when she expected something to be handled. Derek walked to table 14. He stood at the edge of the table and waited until Garrett looked up. Then he spoke in the gentle, regretful voice that expensive restaurants use when they are about to do something that is not gentle and not regretful. He told Garrett that the restaurant had a dress code. He pointed out that the code was noted on the website and that it required business casual attire for all guests. He told Garrett, looking at the navy shirt and the khaki pants, that while he appreciated his patronage, the restaurant reserved the right to ask guests to adjust their appearance or to offer them a table in the bar area downstairs. Garrett looked at him. He did not look angry. He looked the way a man looks when he has just been handed a bill for something he did not break. He asked Derek, quietly, what part of his outfit did not meet the code. Derek hesitated. The shirt was acceptable. The pants were acceptable. The shoes were polished. The truth was that there was nothing technically wrong. The problem was the fabric, the fit, the invisible signals that marked the difference between a $40 outfit and a $400 one. Derek said the word overall presentation. He suggested the bar area might be more comfortable. Noah had stopped drawing. He was watching the tall man talk to his father with the radar that children develop when they live in a house where trouble sometimes arrives in a quiet voice. "Daddy," Noah said, "are we in trouble?" Garrett put his hand on his son's back. He told him no, they were not in trouble, and to keep drawing. But Derek had not come alone. Pamela, unsatisfied with the pace of the resolution, had left her table and crossed the dining room. She arrived at table 14 with the momentum of a woman who had never been told that her arrival was unwelcome. She did not address Garrett. She addressed Derek as if Garrett were a stain on the tablecloth rather than a person sitting in front of her. "I don't think the bar area is appropriate either," she said. "I think they should leave. My guests and I come here every Sunday, and we shouldn't have to explain to visiting clients why the dining room looks like a food court." The sentence landed on the table between the water glass and the crayons. Garrett looked at her. He looked at her the way a man looks at a locked door, measuring it, not yet deciding whether to push. Noah's hand had stopped moving. The crayon was still touching the paper, but the sun he had been drawing remained half-finished. He looked at the woman, then at his father, then at the woman again. His other hand moved to the compass pendant at his chest and held it. "Daddy," he whispered, "she wants us to leave." Garrett leaned close to Noah and told him very quietly that nobody was going to make them leave and that they had a reservation and that their macaroni was on its way. Noah looked at him with the expression of a boy who wanted to believe that but was not yet sure. At the tables nearby, the current of attention had shifted. A man in a blue sport coat set down his fork. A woman in a linen dress turned her head. The couple debating the second bottle of wine had stopped debating. No one intervened. No one spoke. The silence gathered the way weather gathers before a storm. Not empty, but full. A young server near the bar, a girl no older than 22, saw what was happening and took a half step toward the table. But the bartender caught her eye and shook his head once, sharply. She stayed where she was, her tray trembling slightly against her hip. Derek, caught between a profitable regular and a guest who had not violated any actual rule, chose the path that money made easier. He told Garrett, very softly, that perhaps it would be best if they settled the check and came back another time when they were better prepared for the dining room. Garrett did not move. He said, in a voice that carried no anger but no apology either, "I made a reservation. I brought my son here for his first restaurant meal. He's been waiting 6 months. We ordered, we're eating." Pamela's eyes narrowed. She told Derek to call security. She said the word disruptive. She said Garrett's presence was affecting her party's willingness to continue their meal, and that if he was not removed, they would leave and take their business elsewhere, and that she would personally make sure that everyone in her network knew what kind of establishment Bellacourt had become. Derek, to his later shame, picked up the small radio on his belt. The security officer who appeared from the hallway near the restrooms was a broad-shouldered man named Travis Dunn, 45, who had spent 12 years in private security after a back injury ended his time in construction. He was not a man who enjoyed confrontation. He walked slowly, assessed slowly, and preferred to resolve situations with his voice rather than his hands. But he had also learned that the quickest way to keep a job in a place like Bellacourt was to remove the person who had the least money, regardless of who had the most fault. Travis stood beside the table. He looked at Garrett. He looked at Noah. He looked at the half-finished sun on the heavy paper. "Sir," he said, "I'm going to have to ask you to come with me." Noah's face changed. The light that had been in it when he touched the white tablecloth was gone. In its place was something smaller and older. The look of a child who understood that the world had rules he had not been told about, and that those rules did not bend for boys in thrift store trousers. He looked up at his father. "Daddy," he said, and his chin was shaking. Did I do something wrong? Garrett's whole body went still. He looked at his son's face. He looked at the compass pendant trembling against the white polo shirt. He thought about his wife, who had clasped that chain around their boy's neck and told him it would always point him home. He thought about the 5 months of overnight calls and weekend pipe work, and the careful, patient math of a man who wanted to give his child one clean afternoon in a white room. Then he thought about what his wife would have done if she were sitting here. She would not have left. Garrett turned to Travis. He did not raise his voice. He did not stand. He said, "My son asked me if he did something wrong. He's 5. He put on his best clothes. He's been waiting half a year to sit in a chair like this. You tell me what he did wrong." Travis did not answer. Garrett turned to Derek. "You told me this restaurant has a dress code. I looked it up before I came. Business casual. I'm wearing a button-down shirt and pressed pants. My son is wearing a collared shirt. The code doesn't say anything about where the clothes were purchased. So what rule did I break?" Derek opened his mouth and closed it again. Pamela took a step closer. She told Garrett that he was embarrassing himself, that people like him did not understand the difference between meeting a dress code and fitting in, and that if he had any self-awareness, he would take his son and leave before the boy had to see his father escorted out. Garrett looked at her. He let her finish. He let the last word settle on the tablecloth. Then he said, "My son's clothes cost $11. He picked them out himself. He told me they looked like what the people on TV wear at fancy restaurants. He brushed his own hair this morning. He asked me if his shoes were shiny enough." Garrett paused. "He tried harder to be here than anyone at your table." The dining room heard it, not because the sentence was loud, but because it was the kind of sentence that passes through walls. At a table near the fireplace, an older woman set down her wine glass and pressed her fingers against her mouth. The man in the blue sport coat looked down at his plate. The young server by the bar let out a breath she had been holding. Pamela's face tightened, but she did not step back. "Security," she said to Travis. "Do your job." Travis looked at Garrett. Then he looked at Noah, who was now gripping the compass pendant with both hands, his eyes wet, but not yet crying, because his father had told him that they were not in trouble, and he was still trying to believe it. Travis shook his head once. "I'm not dragging a man and his kid out of a restaurant for eating lunch." Pamela stared at him. Her mouth opened. She turned to Derek and told him that if he did not resolve this immediately, she would have a conversation with the owner that would end more than one career in this room. Derek stood frozen between two futures. One future contained a powerful regular client and the money she represented. The other future contained a man and a small boy, and a half-finished drawing of a son. Before he could choose, a door opened at the far end of the dining room. The door led to the private staircase that connected the restaurant to the small office on the 3rd floor where the owner sometimes worked on Sunday mornings, reviewing invoices and signing checks, and occasionally standing at the window to watch the dining room through the interior glass. The woman who stepped through the door was Lorraine Gentry, 67 years old. She was not tall. Her silver hair was cut short and practical. She wore a dark green blouse and black trousers and flat shoes that had been chosen for comfort rather than impression. There was no jewelry on her hands except a plain wedding band she had not removed in 41 years, though her husband had been gone for 6 of them. She walked with the unhurried pace of a person who had built something from nothing and no longer needed to prove it to anyone in the room. 2 steps behind her came Owen Pace, Bellacourt's head chef for the past 9 years. A stocky man with gray temples and flour on his apron who had followed Lorraine down the stairs without being asked, because he had seen, through the kitchen pass, what was happening in the dining room, and because he had known Lorraine long enough to know that she had seen it too. Lorraine stopped at the edge of the dining room and took in the scene the way a surgeon takes in an operating room. Not with panic, but with precision. She saw the man at table 14, sitting upright, his hand on his son's back. She saw the boy with wet eyes and a compass pendant and a half-drawn son. She saw the security guard who had refused to act. She saw the floor manager who had failed to lead. She saw the woman with the charcoal blazer and the certainty of someone who had never been asked to leave anywhere. and she recognized something. Not the man. She had never seen Garrett Hollis before. What she recognized was the posture. The squared shoulders. The chin that stayed level. The way his hand lay flat and steady on the boy's back while the rest of the room decided whether he belonged. She had seen that posture before 40 years ago in a mirror. She walked to the table. Derek saw her first. The color left his face the way water leaves a cracked glass, quickly and completely. Pamela, who did not yet know who this woman was, registered only that someone new had arrived and turned to address her with the automatic authority she applied to all strangers who did not look expensive enough to be important. "Excuse me," Pamela said. "This is a private matter." Lorraine looked at her. The look lasted approximately 3 seconds and contained more information than most people communicate in a paragraph. "No," Lorraine said, "it isn't." She turned to Garrett. She asked him, in the plain voice of a woman who wanted a plain answer, what had happened. Garrett told her. He did not exaggerate. He did not omit. He said that he had made a reservation. That he had brought his son for his first restaurant meal. That they had ordered, and that a guest had asked the floor manager to remove them because they did not look like they belonged. Lorraine listened without interrupting. Then she looked at Noah. "What did you order?" she asked him. Noah looked at his father for permission. Garrett nodded. "Macaroni and cheese," Noah said. His voice was small and careful. The man said, "It has 3 kinds of cheese." "It does," Lorraine said. "It's my recipe. I made it for the first time in 1989. In a kitchen the size of your table. For my son's 6th birthday. He said it was the best thing he'd ever eaten. He was wrong. He was 6, and he'd also said that about a gas station hot dog the week before. But it made me think I might be able to cook for a living." Noah almost smiled. Not quite. But the muscles in his face moved in the direction of a smile. And that was enough. Lorraine straightened. She did not raise her voice. She did not need to. The room had already gone quiet in the particular way that a room goes quiet when the geometry of power shifts. "My name is Lorraine Gentry," she said, turning so that her voice reached the tables nearby. "I opened this restaurant in 1994 with $11,000, a second-hand stove, and a dining room that seated 22 people. I washed the dishes myself for the first 3 years because I could not afford to hire someone to do it. My husband drove a delivery truck during the day and helped me prep vegetables at night. We did not have a dress code because we did not have a host stand. People came in wearing whatever they had worn to work, and we fed them and they came back." She paused. The silence was absolute. "The first customer who ever sat in this building," she said, "was a man in a plumber's uniform who had grease on his knuckles. He ordered the pot roast. He told me it was better than his mother's, which I have since learned is the highest compliment a man from the South will give. He came back every Friday for 11 years until his heart gave out. His name was Russell Dean, and I still have his photograph on the wall in my office." She turned and looked at Pamela. The look was not hostile. It was something worse. It was measured. "You asked my staff to remove a father and his son from my restaurant because their clothes did not meet your personal standard." Pamela's composure cracked along a line so fine that only the people closest to her could see it. She began to speak. She said something about the dining experience, about expectations, about the reputation of the establishment, but the words lost altitude before they reached anyone. Lorraine let her finish. "Ma'am," Lorraine said, "the reputation of this restaurant was built by people who came in from long shifts and sat down to eat with their families. It was not built by people who come in to be seen." Pamela's chin lifted. She tried one more line of defense. She told Lorraine that she had been a loyal client for years, that she had introduced the restaurant to some of the most influential people in Charlotte, that she had single-handedly arranged the visit from the Observer critic who had given Bellacourt its best review. Lorraine nodded once, as if she were acknowledging a fact rather than a threat. "I read that review," she said. "The critic praised the food, the service, and the warmth of the room. He did not write a single sentence about the handbags of the people at the tables. I'd like to think that was the point. A sound moved through the dining room. Not laughter. Not applause. Something quieter. The sound of people releasing a breath they had been holding. Lorraine turned to Derek. She asked him, in the tone of a woman who already knew the answer, whether Garrett had violated any written policy of the restaurant. Derek, who had turned the color of old paper, said no. She asked him whether the child had been disruptive. Derek said no. She asked him why. In that case, he had called security to a table where a father and his son were eating macaroni and cheese. Derek did not have an answer that would survive the question. Lorraine told him that she would be speaking with him in her office at the end of service. She told him that the conversation would be neither short nor comfortable, and that he should spend the rest of the afternoon considering whether his judgment was something she could continue to rely on. She turned to Travis, the security officer, and told him something different. She told him, in front of the room, that he had done the right thing by refusing to remove a guest who had broken no rule, and that his judgment in that moment had been better than the judgment of the people who had given him the order. Travis, who had braced himself for the opposite, blinked twice and nodded. Lorraine looked at Pamela one final time. She did not ask her to leave. She said something simpler and more devastating. "You are welcome to stay and finish your meal," she said. "But I want you to understand something. Every person who walks through that door is my guest, not yours, mine. And in my restaurant, a man in a pressed shirt who saved for 5 months to bring his son to lunch belongs at any table he chooses." Pamela stood very still. Her 3 companions at the long table had gone silent. One of them was looking at her phone. Another was looking at the ceiling. The third was looking at the exit. Pamela picked up her handbag, said nothing, and walked out. Her companions followed in a ragged line, and the click of their heels across the hardwood floor sounded like a retreat. The dining room exhaled. Lorraine turned back to table 14. She pulled out the empty chair across from Garrett and sat down as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "I'm sorry," she said to Noah. "That should not have happened in this place." Noah looked at her. He was still holding the compass pendant, but his grip had loosened. "Are you the boss?" he asked. "I am," she said. "You're nice," he said. "You're nice," he said. Lorraine's mouth moved into a smile that reached her eyes and stayed there. "I try to be," she said, "but I have been told I'm also very stubborn." Owen, the head chef, who had been standing a few paces behind Lorraine with the patience of a man who knew his cue, stepped forward. He crouched beside the table so that he was eye level with Noah. "I hear you ordered the mac and cheese," he said. Noah nodded. "Would you like to see how it's made?" Noah's whole face opened. He looked at Garrett, who nodded. Owen held out his hand, and Noah took it, and the two of them walked toward the kitchen while the dining room watched a 5-year-old boy in a thrift store polo shirt follow a head chef through the swinging doors as if he had been invited to see the inside of a castle. Garrett watched them go. He did not move for a moment. He sat in the white chair at the white table in the clean room that he had saved 5 months to sit in, and he pressed the heel of his hand against his eye. Lorraine waited. She did not pretend she had not seen. "You did the right thing," she said. Garrett shook his head, not in disagreement, but in the way a man shakes his head when something has landed too close to a nerve. "He asked me if he did something wrong," Garrett said. "My 5-year-old son sat in this chair and asked me what he did wrong." Lorraine's expression changed. The steadiness was still in it, but beneath it something moved. A recognition, old and personal and deep. "My husband," she said after a pause, "was a delivery driver. When I opened this place, he used to come in after his shift to eat at the bar because he didn't want to sit in the dining room in his work clothes. He didn't want to embarrass me. I didn't know for months. When I found out, I told him that if the day ever came when a man in a work shirt couldn't eat in the dining room of my restaurant, I would close the doors myself." She looked at the drawing Noah had left on the table. The house, the half-finished son. He died 6 years ago, she said. Heart attack. He was carrying in a case of tomatoes from the truck because the delivery was late and he didn't want me to worry about it. Garrett looked at her. Two people who had lost the person who made the math of daily life bearable, sitting across a white tablecloth, understanding each other in the way that grief makes possible. My wife passed 16 months ago, Garrett said. Cancer. She made me promise that Noah would never stop believing that good places existed. That's why we're here. Lorraine reached across the table and placed her hand briefly over his. It lasted no more than 2 seconds, but it carried the specific weight of a woman who knew exactly what it meant to sit alone at a table that had once held two. Noah came back from the kitchen 12 minutes later. His hands were dusted with breadcrumbs. His face was flushed. He was carrying, with the exaggerated care of a surgeon transporting an organ, a small white plate on which sat a bowl of macaroni and cheese with a golden crust and a sprig of rosemary that Owen had let him place there himself. The plate had a silver cover. Cole, the server, had found one in the back and placed it over the bowl before handing it to Noah. When Noah set the plate on the table and lifted the cover with both hands, his face held an expression that Garrett knew he would remember for the rest of his life. Daddy, Noah said, I made it. Garrett told him it looked perfect. They ate. Lorraine excused herself and returned to her office, but not before stopping in the kitchen to speak with Owen, and not before pausing at Derek's station to tell him, quietly, that his future at Bellacourt would be determined by what he had learned in the last 30 minutes. The dining room settled back into its Sunday rhythm. But the rhythm was different now. The older woman by the fireplace, who had pressed her fingers to her mouth, stopped Garrett on his way to the restroom and told him that his son was a beautiful boy and that he should be proud. The man in the blue sport coat, who had set down his fork and said nothing during the confrontation, caught Garrett's eye and gave a single nod that carried more than most speeches. The young server, who had wanted to step forward and been held back, came to clear their plates and left a small chocolate cake on the table that she said was compliments of the kitchen, but which Garrett suspected had come from her own pocket. When the check arrived, it was inside a small envelope. Garrett opened it and found that the total was 0. Beneath the line where the amount should have been, someone had written in neat handwriting, "First restaurant meal. On the house. LG." Garrett stared at it for a long time. He almost asked Cole to bring the real check. He almost insisted on paying. The money in his wallet had been earned through crawl spaces and cold pipes and early mornings when the alarm went off and the bed was empty on the other side and the only reason to get up was 4 feet tall and sleeping in the next room. But he understood, in the way that working people sometimes understand generosity from other working people, that Lorraine was not offering charity. She was offering recognition. And refusing it would have meant refusing the thing she was trying to say. He left the full amount on the table as a tip for Cole. Every dollar he had budgeted for the meal. Cole found it after they left, counted it twice, and sat down on a crate in the hallway for a moment, because he did not trust his legs. 2 weeks later, Garrett received a phone call. It was from Owen Pace, the head chef, calling on behalf of Lorraine. Owen told him that Lorraine had been thinking about the afternoon. She said she had spent the years since her husband's death building the restaurant into something the city admired, but that she had neglected to build it into something her husband would have recognized. She was restructuring. She wanted to offer Garrett a position. It was new. It did not exist before the Sunday he had walked through the side entrance with his son on his hip. The title was Community and Guest Advocate. The work would not be done in the office or the kitchen. They would be done in the dining room, at the host stand, in the parking lot, and at the side entrance. Everywhere a guest formed their first impression. His job would be to make sure that every person who walked into Bellacourt was treated the way Russell Dean had been treated in 1994. Like someone who had come to be fed, not judged. Garrett asked her why she had chosen him. Lorraine told him, over the phone, in the same plain voice she had used in the dining room, that she had spent 40 years hiring people with degrees and certifications and professional smiles, and that not one of them had done what he did, which was to sit still in a room full of people who wanted him gone and refused to teach his son that the world was right to push him out. "You didn't stand up because you wanted to prove something," she said. "You stayed seated because your boy was watching. That's the kind of judgment I can't train." Garrett took 2 days to think about it. He talked to Noah, who did not understand the details but understood that his father might get to work in the place with the silver covers, and who said, with the clarity of a 5-year-old, "Then you can make sure nobody is mean to people there." He said yes. On his first day, he arrived through the front entrance. He wore the same navy button-down shirt, the same khaki pants, and the same shoes polished with petroleum jelly. Lorraine met him in the dining room, looked at his clothes, and said, "Good." He did not ask what she meant. He already knew. 3 months later, on a Tuesday evening, a woman came in alone. She was in her 70s. Then, wearing a plain brown coat and shoes that had seen better decades, she stood at the host stand and looked at the dining room the way someone looks at an ocean they are not sure they are allowed to swim in. Slung, the host glanced at Garrett. He shook his head once gently and walked to the woman himself. "Welcome to Bellacourt," he said. "Table for one?" The woman looked at him. Her eyes were tired and uncertain and afraid of being told to leave. "I wasn't sure I was allowed in," she said. Garrett picked up a menu and held it against his chest the way a person holds open a door. "You're allowed," he said. "You've always been allowed. We just forgot to say it loud enough." He walked her to a table by the window. The same table where his son had drawn a half-finished sun and touched a white tablecloth for the first time, and he pulled out her chair. And she sat down, and the dining room continued around her as if she had always belonged. Because she had. In a room where a woman's handbag once carried more authority than a father's love, a plumber's son had quietly rewritten the rules. Not with money, not with power, not with a speech designed to go viral, with a chair pulled out and 5 words spoken to a stranger who had almost turned around and walked away. And sometimes that is all it takes. One person who refuses to stand up and leave, so that the next person who walks in does not have to be afraid to sit down.